Today, Africa is the dominant player in IDA, and they are receiving about 70% of the resources. And during the replenishment negotiations, you don't only talk about the money, which is important, you also talk about programs, strategic directions. And here it is very important that if such a large amount is going to Africa, that voice is important. And who better to ask than the African leadership what their thinking is about the strategic directions of Africa and how the international community, including IDA, can support African countries in the achievement of those development goals. It is hugely beneficial for the World Bank, not only to listen to the opinions, but also to get reflections, comments and good guidance on how we may want to structure the next 3 years.
Now, at the last meeting, a growing debt crisis in Africa was a key concern. Is it still a major priority this time around? What are the key priorities?
Debt is remaining an important concern of African countries. Just to give you a sense, the debt service is the equivalent of 7.5% of the gross domestic product of the IDA countries. And that is more than what these countries are spending on education and health. Clearly that is a challenge. However, what we also need to realize is this is not a purely external debt problem. Actually, half of the problem is the domestic public debt. So it's a combination, and it is still a concern to many countries. Now, turning to also on the big ideas that have been discussed. One is clearly that countries are concerned about job creation. And so one of the challenges is to create the jobs, but then you need also to create the conditions that touches on policies, but also on investments. And investments are then in various areas. First and foremost also is what we call the human capital, that is in education and health, and how we can improve. Clearly that is on top of people's mind to improve in this area. But then to be successful, and for example to take full advantage of the digital economy, you need electricity. And still 600 million people in Africa don't have access to electricity. Then there are other areas where there is a concern, is for example food security and clearly climate change.
Now, $93 billion was raised in the IDA 20 back in 2022. What do you expect in terms of commitments for the IDA 21?
So just to unpack a little bit the 93 billion, because we talk a lot about donors, so there is that feeling that the donors are paying that. That's not correct. It's actually out of the 93, 23.5 billion comes from the donors. The rest is done internally, be it through reflows, be it through balance sheet optimization, or also going to international capital markets. And clearly out of the 23.5 billion, there we are engaging donors, the traditional donors, mainly in the OECD countries, but also new donors.
Now, the IMF is forecasting a modest slowdown in developing economies and a slight acceleration in developed economies. How will these global economic realities impact your financing goals and your financing discussions?
The growth prospect of this year will not per se affect the replenishment efforts. I think it is more what is driving donors is that there are multiple crises, including wars and fiscal stress in governments. And so this has had the consequence that their aid budgets are getting smaller, or within the aid budgets that priorities are changing. And that has effect sometimes on the poorest countries.